I remember with absolute clarity the moment when everything truly started to worry me. I was in the aisle of a small neighborhood shop, looking for a bag of coffee, when I suddenly ran into an old friend. His face felt as familiar as my own, but his name, that simple name, completely slipped away from me. I tried to play it off, forcing a smile, while my mind desperately searched for that lost word. That was when a strange sensation ran through my body, a sudden dizziness, as if the floor were moving beneath my feet. I leaned on the shopping cart, trying not to draw attention. He kept talking, and I nodded, but I could barely concentrate. A disturbing thought echoed in my head. What if this is the beginning of something serious? What if I'm losing my memory forever? When I got home, the fear settled in. It wasn't the first time I had forgotten something important, but it had never been so obvious or so uncomfortable. On top of those lapses, the dizzy spells were appearing more and more often. I couldn't help thinking of words like Alzheimer's or stroke. My mother had suffered neurological problems in her final years, and I didn't want to imagine myself repeating her story. For weeks, I tried to convince myself it was just fatigue, maybe a poor night's sleep or the weight of the years. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That mix of confusion and fear pushed me to look for answers. What I didn't imagine was that my body was sending me very clear signals, and that the real cause was far from what I feared. It wasn't age, nor genetics. It wasn't a degenerative disease. It was something much simpler, and at the same time, more dangerous if ignored. A single vitamin that my body had stopped having in the amount necessary to function well. Today I want to tell you how I discovered that deficiency, what it caused in me, and above all, how you can recognize the signs before it's too late. Before we go on, tell me in the comments how many years old you are and where you are watching this video from. The first signs I ignored. At first, everything seemed harmless, little slip-ups that anyone could have. One morning I left the house and shut the door carefully, only to realize seconds later that the keys were still on the dining table. I stood staring at the closed door, feeling a mix of frustration and embarrassment. It was the second time in 1 month that something like that had happened to me. Then I started missing appointments. I would get ready calmly to go out, check my purse, and just as I sat down to have a coffee before leaving, the phone would ring. It was my daughter, asking why I wasn't at the doctor's office for my medical checkup. I was convinced the appointment was the next day. That kind of confusion started to repeat itself. What worried me most was forgetting names, not only of distant acquaintances, but of people close to me. A neighbor who had helped me with the garden for years came by to say hello, and for a few seconds, her name vanished from my mind. I smiled to hide it, but inside I felt as if something very personal had been taken from me. The dizzy spells were added to these episodes. At first they were sporadic, a slight sense of unsteadiness when I stood up too fast, or a little vertigo when I bent down to tie my shoes. I didn't think much of them, until I began to feel them even while sitting. It was as if the world were moving a little more slowly than I was, and I needed a few seconds to fit back into my own body. A strange fatigue arrived too, a kind of tiredness that didn't go away with sleep. In the afternoons, despite having slept well, I felt my eyelids grow heavy and my mind clouded, as if I were thinking inside a fog. Even so, I kept searching for excuses. I told myself it was normal, that it was all due to stress, to worries, or simply that I'm not 20 anymore. And that phrase, the things that come with age, became a shield, so I wouldn't face what was really happening. It didn't help that every time I forgot something, a family member or friend would joke, "You're going to have to start taking memory pills," or "You're not the same as before, you're getting forgetful." They said it laughing, but each comment left an echo in my chest. Because although I tried to take it with humor, deep down I was worried. I knew something was changing in me. What I didn't know was that this something had a cause much more concrete than I ever would have imagined. The day I truly got scared. It was an ordinary autumn morning. I had gone out to do some quick shopping before the rain started. The air was cool, the sky overcast, and I had a short list in my pocket. I went into the supermarket, walked the aisles unhurriedly, chose some fruit, bread and milk. Everything seemed normal, until suddenly, something changed. I couldn't say whether it was an instant or a whole minute, but the feeling was terrifying. All of a sudden, I didn't know which aisle I was in or where I should go. I stood still with the cart in my hands, looking around without clearly recognizing the place. It was as if the world had become strange, as if I had stepped into a scene that didn't belong to me. I felt heat rise from my chest to my head, and my heart pounded. My legs shook, and I had to lean on the cart so I wouldn't fall. A sharp ringing filled my ears, and my whole body seemed to sway. I clutched the cold metal of the cart as if it were the only stable thing on the planet. In those seconds, my mind flooded with catastrophic thoughts. This is a heart attack. It's a stroke. I'm going to faint right here. I remembered stories of people who had lost consciousness in the street and hadn't woken up the same. I felt panic that no one would know who I was or whom to call. A lady a few steps away realized something was wrong and asked if I needed help. I couldn't answer clearly. I barely managed to say that I needed to sit down. She accompanied me to a bench near the entrance, and there I stayed, trying to catch my breath and regain my bearings. After a few minutes, the dizziness lessened, but the insecurity remained. I stood up slowly, paid for what I had, and walked back home with my heart clenched. With every step, I was afraid the episode would return. That afternoon, sitting in the kitchen, I understood I could no longer keep downplaying it. What had happened wasn't a simple lapse or a passing tiredness. There was something in my body that was failing, and if I didn't find out what it was, maybe next time, I wouldn't have the chance to tell the story. That was when I decided to make a medical appointment. No excuses. I knew I might receive hard news, but I also knew that continuing to ignore the signs could cost me much more. What I still didn't imagine was that the real answer would be far from what I feared, and that discovering it would change my life. Medical visits and confusion. With the fear still fresh after that episode at the supermarket, I made an appointment with my primary care physician. In the consultation, I explained what had happened: the lapses, the dizziness, the constant fatigue. He listened attentively, took notes, and asked me a few quick questions about my diet, my sleep habits, and my level of physical activity. He ordered a couple of basic blood tests and a general checkup. I expected those results to show a clear clue, but when I returned for them, his response was reassuring. Perhaps too much so. He told me everything was within normal values, and that my symptoms were probably due to stress and the passing of years. I accepted the explanation, though with some doubt. However, the symptoms didn't let up. The following week, I had another dizzy spell, less intense, but just as unsettling. I made another appointment. This time, they referred me to a neurologist. The specialist gave me a series of quick tests for memory, coordination, and reflexes. He also ordered an MRI to rule out serious problems. When the results came in, everything seemed to be in order. It could be lack of sleep, he suggested. He recommended I establish a stricter routine for rest and reduce my mental load. I followed his instructions to the letter. I went to bed earlier, turned off the television sooner, tried to disconnect from worries before sleeping. But despite my efforts, the memory gaps and the sense of instability didn't disappear. Frustrated, I decided to seek a third opinion. This time, the diagnosis was different. It looks like a depressive picture, another doctor told me, based on my age, the tiredness I felt, and the frequent lapses. He proposed starting treatment for depression. That was the first time I felt something didn't fit at all. I didn't feel depressed. Worried, yes. Tired, too. But I knew what deep sadness was, and I wasn't at that point. Still, it was hard to argue with professionals who looked at my symptoms and matched them to common diagnoses in older people. I left that consultation with a prescription in my hand, but without the certainty that this was the real issue. Something inside me told me the answer lay elsewhere, and that I still hadn't reached the root. A doctor asked the key question. After several failed attempts to get answers, I was tired of going from appointment to appointment and leaving with more doubts than certainties. Even so, a friend insisted I visit a doctor who, according to her, doesn't stop at the first thing he sees. I decided to give it one last chance before resigning myself to living with my symptoms. From the very beginning, this new doctor gave me a different feeling. He didn't rush to conclusions. Instead of interrupting, he let me tell my whole story, from the first lapses to the episode at the supermarket. He asked specific questions, wrote down every detail, and didn't seem willing to simplify my symptoms under the label of things that come with age. At one point in the conversation, he changed course and began asking about my diet. Not in general terms, but with a level of detail no other doctor had asked for. He asked how many times a week I ate meat, eggs, or dairy. He asked me to recall whether I had made recent changes to my diet, whether I had reduced certain food groups by choice or because of digestive issues. I told him that in recent years I had greatly reduced my consumption of red meat because it felt heavy, and that sometimes several days went by without me eating fish or eggs. I also mentioned that some dairy products had been bothering me for a while, and I had started to avoid them. Then he looked at me intently and said, "We may be facing a nutritional deficiency, and I don't mean a simple imbalance, but something that can directly affect memory, balance, and energy." He pulled out a sheet and began writing a list of blood tests more complete than any I had been asked for before. It included specific tests to measure vitamin and mineral levels, especially those related to the nervous system. He explained that some deficiencies don't show up in routine checkups, and that if you don't request them specifically, they can go unnoticed for years. I left that appointment feeling a mix of intrigue and hope. For the first time, I felt someone was looking beyond the surface. The doctor didn't just tell me I was stressed or needed more sleep. He wanted to find the real cause, and I was willing to follow every step to discover it. I didn't know it yet, but those tests would mark a before and after in my life. In a few days, I was going to receive an answer that would change not only my health, but also the way I understood my own body. The surprise: deficiency of a key vitamin. The results took a few days, but to me the wait felt endless. When the doctor received me, I noticed he didn't have that indifferent expression some professionals wear when everything is fine. He sat across from me, reviewed the pages, and said calmly, "We already know what's going on." In my mind, I braced myself to hear about a complicated disease, a diagnosis that would change my whole future. But what he said next left me bewildered. "You have a significant vitamin B12 deficiency." I was silent. It wasn't an unfamiliar word to me. I had seen it on food and supplement labels, but I never imagined that its absence could cause so much distress. Seeing my confusion, the doctor decided to explain it simply. "Vitamin B12, he said, is essential for the brain and the nervous system to function correctly. It's like the oil that keeps the engine smooth. It helps form the myelin sheath, a protective layer that coats the nerves and allows them to transmit signals quickly. Without it, nerve connections become slower and less efficient. It's also key in the production of red blood cells, which carry oxygen throughout the body. When there's a deficiency, the brain and muscles can receive less oxygen, which causes fatigue, weakness, and even dizziness. Now you understand why you have those episodes of instability," he added. "When the nervous system doesn't get the support it needs, not only does memory suffer, balance and coordination are altered as well." He explained that this deficiency can develop silently over months or even years, especially in people who, like me, have reduced their intake of animal products or have trouble absorbing nutrients. It doesn't matter if one thinks they are eating enough, because sometimes the body stops processing the vitamin properly due to causes like chronic gastritis, certain medications, or changes in the stomach lining that come with age. The most striking part was learning that many of my symptoms could be reversed if I restored adequate levels. I wasn't facing irreversible damage, but I was facing a serious warning. If I had kept ignoring it, the consequences could have become permanent. I left the appointment with a mix of relief and amazement. After so many visits, mistaken diagnoses, and nights of worry, the cause wasn't a degenerative disease or an unsolvable problem. It was a simple vitamin, simple but absolutely vital. How I ended up with that deficiency. After listening to the doctor, I began to go over my life and look for the moment when I had started walking toward that deficiency without realizing it. It wasn't a sudden change, but a series of small decisions that, added to age-related factors, had opened the door to a serious problem. Over the years, my diet had changed a lot. When I was younger, meats, fish, eggs, and dairy were always on my table, but little by little, I began to reduce them. Sometimes for health reasons, I wanted to watch my cholesterol. Other times for convenience. Preparing a piece of meat or fish in the oven no longer felt so simple, so I opted for quicker, lighter meals. I had also developed some intolerance to certain dairy products. A glass of milk or a piece of strong cheese left my stomach heavy or uncomfortable. Without realizing it, I eliminated almost all the products that caused that discomfort. I thought I was making healthy choices, but I didn't consider that I was losing important sources of vitamin B12. The doctor also explained that as we age, our bodies produce less hydrochloric acid in the stomach, which makes it harder to absorb certain nutrients, especially B12. This means that even if I eat foods that contain it, my body doesn't make use of them the way it used to. And if we add to that a diet increasingly limited in animal products, the result was predictable. Another factor that may have played a part was digestive problems I never took seriously. For years, I lived with episodes of gastritis and reflux. I took antacids on my own, and although they helped in the moment, I didn't think about how they might be affecting my ability to absorb nutrients. The doctor explained that some acid-reducing medications, taken for a long time, can also reduce the absorption of B12. Reflecting, I understood I had made mistakes common to many older people, reducing or eliminating entire food groups without looking for proper substitutes. Believing that eating less or lighter is always better for health. Ignoring chronic digestive symptoms, thinking they are a normal part of aging. Not getting comprehensive tests that include vitamins and minerals, relying only on basic checkups. My case wasn't an exception, but an example of how, over time, a heap of small oversights can turn into a serious problem. And the most dangerous part was that, until then, I didn't even know I was at risk. The day I went back to the office for the doctor to explain the treatment plan, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. It wasn't an empty promise, but a clear path to recover what I had lost. The first instruction was to begin vitamin B12 supplementation under his supervision. He explained that because my level was so low and I might have difficulty absorbing it orally, the best thing was to start with intramuscular injections. These would allow the vitamin to go directly into the bloodstream without depending on the digestive process. During the first few weeks, I went to the clinic to receive the scheduled doses. It wasn't painful, and every time I left, I felt I was doing something concrete for my well-being. As the days went by, I also began to notice small changes. One morning I realized I'd woken up with more energy, without that heaviness that had followed me for months. At the same time, the doctor reviewed my diet. He suggested gradually reintroducing, in a moderate way, and adapted to my tolerance, foods rich in B12, oily fish, eggs, some low-lactose dairy products, and lean meats in small but regular portions. He also showed me fortified options, like certain plant-based milks, for days when I preferred to avoid animal products. At first, the idea of reorganizing my diet felt like a challenge. I had spent years eating a certain way, and changing routines in the kitchen isn't easy. But I decided to see it as an investment in my health. I even rediscovered my taste for simple, nutritious recipes I had left behind. The improvements came gradually, almost silently. One day, while walking around the neighborhood, I realized I didn't feel that slight sway in my body. Another day, talking with a friend, I noticed I remembered perfectly a detail he had told me weeks earlier. And most encouraging of all, the dizzy spells became less and less frequent and less intense. It wasn't magic or an overnight change. There were tired days and moments when I doubted whether I was making progress. But each small step forward was a sign that my body was responding. The most valuable part was understanding that, with proper guidance and the right diagnosis, much of what was affecting me could improve. Looking back, I'm amazed to think it all began with a vitamin I barely knew. Today, thanks to a personalized treatment and conscious changes in my diet, my memory is clearer, my energy has returned, and I feel steady on my feet again. And most importantly, I regained the confidence that I can still actively take care of my health. What I learned, and want you to know. Looking back, I realized the most important thing wasn't just recovering, but learning a lesson that can help others. For months, my body was sending me clear signals, lapses that weren't normal for me, sudden dizzy spells, a fatigue that my routine didn't explain. But I ignored them or accepted them as something inevitable, as things that come with age. That was my first mistake. The truth is that our body always speaks. Sometimes it just speaks in a low voice. And if we don't pay attention, the warnings turn into more serious problems. We shouldn't normalize symptoms we didn't have before, no matter how small they seem. Every new change deserves to be watched, discussed with a professional, and if necessary, investigated in depth. Another big lesson I learned is the value of seeking second and even third opinions. If I had settled for the first diagnosis, I would probably still think it was all stress or lack of sleep, and my vitamin B12 deficiency would have continued to worsen. Doctors are human, and like everyone can overlook important details. A new professional, with another way of looking at things, can ask questions that completely change the course of a diagnosis. I also understood that routine blood work doesn't always show the whole story. Many nutritional deficiencies, hormonal problems, or specific imbalances are not detected in a basic checkup. You have to ask, and insist, if necessary, for more complete studies when the symptoms don't fit the initial explanations. In my case, a single specific test made the difference between staying in the dark and finding the answer. Lastly, I understood that health isn't only about treating diseases, but about preventing them. Getting periodic checkups, caring for your diet, staying active, and above all, listening to your own body are acts of responsibility toward yourself. Age doesn't have to be synonymous with inevitable decline. If there's one thing I want you to remember from my story, it's this. Don't settle for living with symptoms you don't understand. Ask questions, investigate, seek help until you have an answer that makes sense. Your well-being is worth the effort, and many times, the solution is closer and simpler than you imagine. Tips to avoid this deficiency. If there's one thing I want to make clear after my experience, it's that vitamin B12 deficiency isn't a problem exclusive to a few people or something rare that only appears in extreme cases. It's much more common than we think, especially after a certain age, and preventing it is simpler than having to treat its consequences. 1. Foods rich in vitamin B12. B12 is found mainly in animal-based foods. Including them regularly and in balance can make a real difference. Fish, salmon, tuna, sardines, and cod are excellent sources. They also provide fatty acids that benefit the brain. Lean meats, chicken, turkey, and beef in low-fat cuts. It isn't necessary to eat large amounts. Consistency is what matters. Eggs, especially the yolk, which contains much of the vitamin. Dairy, milk, yogurt, and cheese, preferably low-fat or lactose-free if there's intolerance. Fortified foods, some plant-based drinks, cereals, and meat substitutes are enriched with B12, ideal for those who follow diets with fewer animal products. It's not about eating large portions or the same foods every day, but about keeping enough variety to ensure a steady supply. 2. Checkups and prevention. Starting at 50 years of age, and even earlier if there are symptoms or risk factors, it's wise to include vitamin B12 measurement in periodic blood work. Routine checkups aren't enough. You have to request specific tests. This is especially important if you follow a vegetarian or vegan diet, if you have reduced animal foods for any reason, or if you have chronic digestive issues. It's also advisable to review the medications you take regularly. Some drugs for acidity, diabetes, or high blood pressure can interfere with the absorption of this vitamin. 3. Don't self-medicate. Vitamin B12 is safe in most cases, but that doesn't mean we should take supplements without supervision. Prolonged excess can also bring unwanted effects, and the most important thing is to make sure the deficiency truly exists before treating it. The supplement, dose, and method of administration, oral or injectable, should be decided together with a doctor based on tests and each person's situation. In short, preventing this deficiency means caring for your diet, knowing your own risks, and getting comprehensive checkups. You don't have to wait for lapses, dizzy spells, or extreme fatigue to act. A little attention today can prevent months of discomfort tomorrow. Your health, your responsibility. Looking back over everything I lived through, it's clear that this path could have been shorter and less distressing if I had acted earlier. A simple checkup, one more question, a bit of extra attention to what my body was telling me, and I might have avoided months of tiredness, dizzy spells, and worries. My story proves that many times, big problems begin with small signs. Forgetting a name, feeling dizzy, noticing constant fatigue. These are things we usually justify with phrases like, "It must be age," or "I'm stressed." But those quick explanations, although they calm us for a moment, can take us farther from the true cause. The most valuable thing I learned is that the right information, received in time, can change the course of your life. A doctor who listens, a well-done test, an honest conversation about what you feel. All of that can be the difference between living with a silent problem or resolving it in time. And it's not just about vitamin B12. This message applies to every aspect of health. The responsibility to take care of ourselves starts with us. Yes, doctors are important, and tests too, but nobody knows your body like you do. If something doesn't add up, insist. If you don't feel heard, look for another opinion. And above all, don't resign yourself to living with discomforts you didn't have before. Today I can say I feel better, clearer, more energetic, and above all, more aware of what I need to stay well. And if this video gets even one person to pay attention to their symptoms and seek help, it will have been worth telling the story. If right now you feel the way I felt, make yourself heard, insist, and take care of your health. Don't underestimate the power of small changes. They can spare you big problems. And before I say goodbye, I'd love for you to tell me in the comments how many years old you are and where you are watching this video from. Also, if you know someone who could benefit from this information, share it. Maybe, with a simple gesture, you are giving someone else the chance to reclaim their well-being.